Europe today. So this is the last section of notes that we do in Geography A. So I know that's exciting. So we're going to talk about Europe as an entirety today, as a continent. Okay, so Europe is the birthplace of modern industry. The Industrial Revolution, we know, starts in Great Britain, in the United Kingdom, and then it quickly spreads to different parts of Europe and eventually the United States. This is the birthplace of manufacturing, of service industry, of everything. So there's heavy versus light industry. So you have, they manufacture ships and trains and cars and airplanes, but then they also do light manufacturing of different light goods, right? Like textiles, clothing, stuff like that. 60% of the European population works in service industries. So, very similar to the United States and Canada, service industries have become the most important, field of business. And again, just to remind you, a service industry is a job where you're not actually providing a product, you're providing a service of some kind. Insurance and banking are the most popular professions in Europe. A lot of people work in the insurance or in banking. So they'll work in finance, they'll work in loan officers. Different types of banking jobs are very popular. And then tourism, of course, is very important. Spain, Italy, France, Greece, and England all make a lot of money from people going to visit, particularly tourism from the United States. There's a lot of people that they'll track their family's history, and they'll be like, my family comes from Germany, or my family comes from France, or England, or Ireland, and they'll go back to where their family comes from and try and visit where their family's from. Sometimes you can actually find distant relatives that way. So tourism is very popular. And again, remember the cities that they have, right? Paris and Berlin and Rome and Madrid and Barcelona and London and Athens, right? All these cities are super famous and historic. So there's a lot of really cool stuff you can go and see. Okay, agriculture, it varies by area. In the Mediterranean, they grow lots of olives and citrus fruit. In North Europe, it's a lot of wheat and rye. In that Great Plains, Northern European plain area, they grow lots of grains. In Denmark, it's fisheries. And so in Scandinavia, it's fisheries, a lot of fish, a lot of seafood. And then you have mixed farming, which is raising several different crops and livestock on the same farm. So instead of having just one big farm and it being a corn farm, they'll have, beans and squash and corn and chickens and cows and mixed farming, right? Transportation, railways are connected to most of the major cities. They have what's called high-speed bullet trains. These are also popular in Asia. We'll talk about them in Geography B. But you can get a train ticket, you can be in Paris and get a train ticket to London, and you can be in London in under 3 hours on a train. Okay, they're also number 2 in automobile ownership. So a lot of people have cars. Driving is still very, very popular. The number 1 automobile ownership place in the world, though, is the United States. But in Europe, it is very popular as well. Waterways, they handle half of the world's international shipping. And that makes sense because Europe is in between Asia and North America. So a lot of trade will happen where things get brought to Europe and they'll come from Europe to the United States. So they handle about half of the world's international shipping. The European Union, this is probably the most important aspect of the notes that we're talking about today. So the European Union was created in 1992 by the Maastricht Treaty. This removed restrictions and tariffs throughout the European Union members, and it created a common currency. So before, if you were in Germany, you used the mark. Then if you went to France, you used the franc. And so each country had its own type of currency, and that currency was worth different values. And it was really complicated because remember that Europe is kind of like if you're just traveling between states in America. That is what it is like in Europe. I mean, you can drive just a couple of hours and be in a whole different country. And each time you would do that, you'd have to stop at the border crossing and you'd have to get your passport and they'd have to stamp it. and you would have to give them your money, and they'd have to convert your money into their money, and then you would go about your way, and the pricing wasn't right. So for example, like if you were buying, a bag of chips and it was $2 in your country, but then you just drive an hour or so and you're in another country, that bag of chips might cost 3 balloons, and you're like, it costs $2. Why is it? What is this? Three of whatever. And so the pricing was different, and it wasn't very good for business. And as you can imagine, like trying to trade or buy things became very difficult. So they created a common currency called the euro, and now all 27 member countries of the EU use the same currency. And now trading is a lot easier. Buying things in a different country is a lot easier. The value of the currency is the same in all the different European Union member countries. So it was a very important thing. The Maastricht Treaty created the euro and also eliminated tariffs throughout the countries. And then in 2004, the EU Constitution was established. It was not ratified by all members, and a new one was adopted in 2009. And so there is a governing body that rules over the top of the EU and kind of makes the rules and agreements for all the countries that are in the European Union. And then impact of the post-Soviet Union. So once the Soviet Union collapsed, we kind of talked about the partitioning of Germany after World War II. And we know that the Soviet Union hung on to the eastern part of Germany, and Berlin was literally divided down the middle. Like it was a huge fence with armed guards, and if you tried to climb over the fence, they would shoot and kill you. And so the example that I always give to kind of make it more relevant to you guys is imagine if they built a 20-foot concrete wall with barbed wire and watchtowers, and they had military troops with guns that would shoot you if you try to cross over the wall, and they built that wall right down the middle of Broadway. And you might have a grandmother that lives on the other side of Broadway from you, or your school might have been on the other side of that wall. That's what happened in Berlin during the Soviet Union occupation of it. And so when the Soviet Union collapsed, they tore down the Berlin Wall in 1989, so a little bit before the official collapse. And this was the fall of communism. It left countries in complete ruin, and it became expensive to transition from being a part of the Soviet Union to developing your own government and your own economy. It was extremely expensive to rebuild your war-torn country, rebuild the infrastructure, build a new government, and fix the problems that those countries were facing. And they had to compete with the countries that were now unified in Western Europe that are in the European Union. And so those countries had their stuff together. They were working together to benefit one another on the trade market and in the international economy. And these countries that had just got their independence from the Soviet Union are now trying to compete with this highly polished product in Western Europe. Also, in the Soviet Union, they had communism, and in communism, everyone had health care. It was paid for by the government, and everyone lost their health care when the Soviet Union collapsed. So people lost the ability to have medical coverage to help them with doctors' bills and surgeries and stuff like that. And the death rate rose and life expectancy dropped as a result of the Soviet Union collapsing and people losing their health care and people having to transition into this new economy. So the Soviet Union, we call them the satellite countries, but they were the countries that were a part of the Soviet Union. And then when the Soviet Union collapsed, they became independent. They suffered greatly, and they're just starting to catch up now. And I mean, the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. It's 2020. It's almost been 30 years, and they're just now starting to catch up. Okay, and then these are just the countries in Europe. This is what the Soviet Union looked like, and these are all the countries that I'm talking about. These were the countries that were a part of the Soviet Union and then became their own independent country afterwards. So we're talking about Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, Moldova, Ukraine, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. And then, of course, Russia. So all 15 of these became independent after the Soviet Union collapsed, and they suffered greatly economically. and fiscally. And so it was a big deal for them to recover, and they're just now starting to catch up. And this is what the Berlin Wall looked like, and they literally built the Berlin Wall right down the middle of the city of Berlin. And this is what the wall looked like. And at some point, they built the concrete wall, and then they put up like a fence in eastern Germany, and this area in between was called no man's land. And if you made it over into here, you would get shot, and they would just leave your body in there. Okay, so that's it for the notes. Thanks for watching.